Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight again for episode 5 in conversation with the BIM Community Africa. Tonight we talk about digital twins. Are the rumors true? What are digital twins? Why do we need them, and how do we get there? So on my panel tonight, I'm going to ask the guys to introduce themselves, starting from left to right. Richard, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Richard. I am a civil engineer, and I have a particular passion for all things digital, and in particular, a real interest in digital twins. And I'm really looking forward to hearing everyone's views this evening as we unpack what this means.
Thank you, Richard. Janine.
Hi, my name is Janine Strachen. I have an architectural and interior design background, but I've recently moved over to the dark side and I'm now working for an engineering firm.
Thank you, Janine. Rad.
Hi, Rad from Deventer. I'm basically architectural, but I've been working in the facilities environment for a long time. And from my side, I've always been interested in digital twins when they were simply data that we collected on the buildings and made sure that somebody could use it.
Thank you, Rad. Craig.
Hi, Craig Howie. I'm working in the AEC space for a multidisciplinary company. And I'm based in Durban.
Thank you, Craig. Herman?
Hi there. I'm an electrical engineer and I'm a security specialist, but digital twins and BIM are very much in line of the forensic experiences and specialization that I'm taking into my career right now.
Fantastic. Thank you, Herman. And last but not least, Andrew.
Hi, everybody. Andrew Mason. I started my career looking after buildings at the end of their life cycle. I then went to starting building new buildings at the beginning of their life cycle. And now I'm dealing with the messy middle, which is facilities management. So glad to be with everybody and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Andrew, and welcome. So the first question I'm going to throw out, and we'll throw it out to Richard. Richard, what are digital twins?
I knew you were going to do that. Jay, digital twin is something that comes out of the lifecycle management sciences. There's a very clever professor by the name of Michael Greaves, working together with a guy called John Vickers, who was from NASA. And the two of them were working on project lifecycle management back in 2002. And in conversation, they started talking about computer models that could replicate the behavior of real models, in particular on a factory floor. And one of them said, it's a bit like a doppelganger, someone who's copying you and mimicking you. And the term digital twin emerged and entered into publication. So in its simplest description, it's a computer model of a thing in reality that is a very, very close representation of the real thing on computer. And in particular, it is linked to information about the reality, and it can represent data about its characteristics and its behavior in the virtual world. And it can also send back instructions from the virtual world to the physical world to cause it to operate. So for example, a machine that can be operated by an artificial intelligence twin. So that's a very, very quick definition.
Thank you, Richard. So Andrew, if I had to ask, why do we need digital twins?
Why do we need it? It is, in my view, the connection between the development team and the management team that goes on to manage the facility. Traditionally, the building environment has been like no other production environment, that the two parts of the model are never connected. The development team walk away from the building to be handed over to the facilities team. And I think the connection there is what the digital twin is. And I think Richard is obviously the expert on this, but for me, the potential of the digital twin in the management of that asset is where it's really, really exciting for me. So where it's going to be used, definitely in the management of that asset, which can go on for 30, 40, 50, sometimes 100 years. I mean, I've worked on on built assets that are up to 900 years old. So it's going to go long past where we are. So that's, for me, where it's really, really exciting, is the management of those assets.
So the next question I want to ask, is digital twins then only applicable at the handover stage of a building, or does it have a role to play in the other phases of the development cycle as well? Any volunteers on that one?
I'll take that. I think one of the issues that we're a little bit worried about is BIM itself has started a lot of debate about digital twins. And I think this is the acknowledgement of some of the data that's available from the BIM model for facilities management and managing the building afterwards. And in reality, BIM itself is a reflection of the data that you can collect. So I think one needs to start looking at really quite simple aspects of it and see that it's data that you are collecting. It doesn't necessarily have to be a fancy 3D model, but it is something that you can maintain this model, and you give easy and accessible tools to access that information so it can be used on an ongoing basis. Because 95% of our buildings that exist now are really not modeled in software at all. So we really have to start from that and make something that we can use. And I think the digital twin, maybe as a really start kickoff point, is a good way to go about that thing.
Thank you, Rudd. And so digital twinning, as Richard said, started in the sort of PLM space. Craig, a question for you. How do we already use the digital twin concept, for instance, in the design phase of a building?
Yeah, so I think, just to go to your previous question as well, that digital twins are not exclusively for the operations phase. It really is about threading the information and the data across through the different life cycles, stages of a project. So from design into construction, and then obviously the big ticket item it being into operations. I think through the advent of building information modeling, I think a lot of design companies in South Africa have now grown their maturity around creating essentially what could be referred to as the beginnings of digital twins. And the big thing really now is just to take that a little bit further and start pushing it from this sort of silo within the design environment a little bit more into the construction space, and that may look like something a little bit different, and then obviously eventually into the operation space. And once again, it could look like something very different to what we're busy playing with or using within the design space at the moment.
Rudd, you mentioned earlier that the concept of digital twins is not new, that it has been used over time, just being more the data concept of it and not as much the graphical side of it. How do we bring everything together? How do we get from where we are now to actually the digital twin environment?
Okay, if you start looking at it in that sense, one of the advantages of having a digital twin, firstly, is the accuracy of the data in reality. The second thing is you can connect it to a whole bunch of domains where with sensors, you can feed information back and forth between the digital and the physical world and then take actions about that. So you open up a whole doorway for machine learning. And once you have enough data that you can work with, artificial intelligence. So it really is quite a fancy way of getting to things that will be of enormous assistance in people managing stuff. And I agree with Craig on his start off with it as a construction-based digital twin. And I think that availability, as I said before, that availability of data is what started the real strong debate about you can't let that data go missing at the end of a physical construction project.
But how do we stop that from happening? Currently, again, most data gets handed over to PDF and all of that goes missing. Janine, in your space, I think the use of 3D models and the concept of BIM in the mining industry has actually been around, almost feels so a lot longer than what it has been in the the pure architecture space. What has your sort of experience been around that?
Yes, Jay, that was actually one of the things that surprised me the most, was moving over into the mining environment, was how far they've actually come in terms of developing their models and inputting data into their models. And what we actually use is, once we've compiled the entire site and everything's been placed into Navis, the guys actually go and they plug all the data. So your PDFs, your data sheets, your drawings, everything gets plugged into this Navisworks model. And we actually have clients on site that have VR rooms set up, where they've actually got an Oculus Rift or an HTV Vive set up, and they actually use the Navisworks model to walk through the building, open up these documents, and they actually do virtual walkthroughs, and they do virtual clash detections and checkings of the model in that way, and it's actually very cool. So from that point of view, we've gotten to a point where we've actually started plugging all of this data into our models, and at the end of the project we hand over a Navisworks model. We don't hand over any 2D drawings, prints, pieces of paper, nothing. We hand over a Navis model.
Well, that's fantastic. Richard, usually when we speak about digital twins and we speak about BIM, the conversation usually leans itself towards buildings. How does this apply in the infrastructure space?
With difficulty. So there's a couple of key characteristics that differentiate a BIM model, whether that's a design BIM or an as-built BIM model, from a twin. A virtual copy of an asset becomes a twin when it comes alive with data. So when there's a loop that is both information from the real world to the virtual, and then from the virtual back to the real world. So if you're doing a twin of a machine, that's fairly straightforward, programming aside, because the machine can be fitted with sensors. It has actuators. It's got pistons and motors and things that can be activated from the virtual back to the physical. A building is not quite as easy, but it's still, we've got building management systems. That's not new. So a building management system integrated with a model of itself and the right intelligence to understand itself could conceivably become a digital twin. And there are prototypes worldwide of things like that. When you start looking at infrastructure like a road, you can't plug anything into a road. And so the complexity of what are you using to actuate activity emerges. So now, instead of an automated control command going from a computer back to a motor to switch on or off, it's now sending information through to a project manager or an operations manager to say, you are due to do a resurface on this road in the next 6 months. So it can become a twin, but it's a lot trickier, and it takes on a vastly different format. Types of infrastructure like water supply systems or electrical networks, there's a lot more automation that's possible there. So roads are probably some of the hardest things to twin. But it's that concept of sensing and gathering information, being able to process that information to take decisions, ideally automatically through artificial intelligence, and then actuating back from the virtual to the physical to make something happen.
So, Herman, to jump over to you, with all this digital data flowing backwards and forwards, what security concerns are there in this digital twin environment?
Well, that's where all the excitement really begins from our perspective. So we consider the digital twin as a single point of truth from the one hand, but on the second hand, if we look at, for instance, what we've been doing in the Vodafone buildings in the UK, everything is interconnected through IoT. All the facility management stuff, all the movement of people, the assets are all logged. So the entire dynamic of that building, plus its assets, the air quality, the light quality, the piping, everything is under camera primarily, but otherwise all the signals are brought into a command and control center. In that control center, all the information is in the cloud. We've got artificial intelligence engines on that. We've got machine learning on that. We've got neural language programming on that. So what we're doing there is we're looking at the immunity of the building, the health of the building. That's not just the health of the people that are in the building, but the actual health of the structures and the generators, the HVACs, et cetera, and the people. But also what we're doing is we're actually monitoring it to maximize the optimal efficiencies of all the elements of that building. When you've got all of that on IoT and you've got all of that into a command and control center, if you're starting to look at it from an asset management point of view, it's really quite simple. The AI and all that sort of stuff just makes 100% sure that you just don't have a whole lot of screens with tons and tons of data. And it's just, graphics and all that sort of good stuff. And everybody says, oh, it's a bit more today than what it is yesterday. How was it over the last 6 months? What's the differential between summer, winter, and the other 2 seasons? So all of that comes back into actually optimizing how you look after people and create that environment that is absolutely optimal for their highest levels of performance. Likewise, from a security point of view, is that you've got total access, total asset management on it. And what you're doing is by creating an integrated environment that is transparent to the occupants of that building, you develop a mentality of safety and you develop a mentality of honesty. And you continuously relate that back to what was that building designed and how does it actually meet the design criteria of the client, the design of the contractor and the designers of that building. And so that you build this continuous level of excellence and improve that level of excellence as you build the new buildings and as you modify old buildings or renovate old buildings. From a forensics point of view, we're bringing that stuff back to South Africa now, and we're working with the Zondo Commission and various other commissions looking at the SOEs and how, it's going to happen. This massive infrastructure build is going to take place nearing the end of COVID. How do we actually ensure that everybody gets the bang for their buck and that there isn't any pilferage or criminality going on? Well, I hope I've answered that in a big way for you.
No, thank you, Herman. That does answer me. So what I'm getting is that digital twins will start answering the so what about all the data that gets collected and starts informing future decisions. Does that make sense, Richard?
Yeah, definitely.
This massive new mega city that Saudi is busy planning and will be putting into effect in the next couple of years. If you look at the infrastructure, we're actually looking at designing in sensors into the roads, sensors into the bridges, sensors into the dam walls, to bring back that information so that it's not just this thing was designed to last for 15 years and it's going to have a repair every, 6 years or whatever the case is. We're actually going to be measuring that infrastructure, the torque, the twist, the degradation, and that'll all come across in IoT as well. And so we're not only forensically monitoring the design and the build qualities, but we're actually being proactive and forecasting the actual maintenance thereof. I don't know if that helps anybody.
So in our current environment, in the current environment of the construction industry we find ourselves in, there's very few projects going ahead until we get the government spending coming loose on our infrastructure development. How do we use digital twins moving forward on the brownfields projects that are out there at the moment? Craig, any comment from you?
So I think the exciting thing about brownfields projects is obviously with the advent of point cloud scanning, you can very rapidly get a replica of your built asset. And you don't need to go through the many months or even maybe years of creation of virtual 3D models that design consultants produce. So to me, that's a space, the brownfield space is really where we could latch onto digital twins very quickly, and then very quickly start embedding information into those point cloud scans, without the fuss of having to go through, the design stages and then the construction stages, and then hoping at the end that whatever the design team and construction teams put together is suitable for you as the facilities manager or as the client. So I think that's really where exponential growth can be, is because then we're actually, it's a bit weird saying this because I work for a big design consulting company, but it's almost then taking the design process and the construction process out of the picture to very quickly get going and mobilized.
So Rod, you mentioned earlier that, the collection of data has been done for quite some time in your space. Is there a way for us to use the data that's been collected on the building already, even though we don't have the 3D model of the building, but to start plugging in AI into that to start helping us informing sort of what we need to do next in that building?
Yeah, I think, we've worked mostly on brown sites, and invariably your first part is just to collect the data and have information you need. And I've seen a whole lot of places where the data has been collected, and simply because there isn't some sort of repository, some place where you can put the data, when you've finished and you leave with all your data. You can hand it over to the guys in the CD or whatever you have, and there's just no ways they can absorb it. And I think that, to me, is where the kink in the armor is at the moment. Somewhere between the construction industry creating all of that information and making it really intelligible and well worthwhile, and the facilities managers needing it desperately, there needs to be a serious investment in some sort of software model that can store this data and set it up for the different domains like mechanical, electrical, and facilities, where the people can have the core data which comes from the BIM model, and then access this on an as needed basis, or part of it on an as needed basis, and they can add their own enhancements to it. So Richard talked about BMS. So we're talking about sensors that are in the spaces and tell you what temperature it is. You can then also add information about what day it is, whether there's an event on, if it's a winter or if it's summer, or if it's a Saturday or Sunday and very few people are going to be in the building. And then you can work with those things in that particular domain. But that investment in that software is not happening at this particular point in time. So we're missing the boat a little bit, but I think it's going to end up, and I think it needs to be directed at the real estate industry, as to needing to spend a lot more money on that software investment.
So that sort of speaks almost to a little bit of computer-aided facilities management. Andrew, that's your domain. Any vision or anything that's out in the market at the moment that sort of answers this type of question?
Yeah, I think computer-aided facilities management in many ways is almost yesterday. It's last year's technology. I mean, if you look at integrated workplace management software, I think that's the next sort of 4.2 version of CAFM. To go back to Rudd's point about this information, if you look at the model over the life cycle, you build up this BIM model to the handover, and then that's the crest of the wave, and everything after that, it sort of falls away. Really, what should be happening is you should be adding to that. I mean, that data repository, whatever software system that sits in, the rich, I mean, there's this idea of fat data and big data. And if you have fat data and big data together, you get rich data. But you've got sort of big data in the BIM model, with very little sort of nuance in terms of how it's operated on the sort of, if you like, the Y scale. On the X scale, over a period of years, you have user data that adds that fat layer of data, that real sort of nuanced type data. And if you put those two together, you're going to get a massive data set that it can only benefit the development team in trying to learn as an after action review after 10 years, whatever it might be on that asset, to say, this is how our asset that we handed over 10 years ago has performed. And we can look back, maybe, hopefully it doesn't take 10 years, but you can look back and improve your design as you go forward. So I think, you know, we need to understand how that building is used. You know, it's all very well producing a product that is basically unleashed on an unwitting owner sometimes and his facilities management team that hasn't been tested. It's a complete prototype. And the development team should be very, very interested as to how that design performs in reality. So this idea of big data, fat data, and from that you get rich data, whether that's a CAFM system, an IWMS system, or whatever the next version of those four-letter acronyms are, it needs to be held somewhere, and it needs to be built as you go through the operation lifecycle. And I think one thing we need to understand is that digital twin is great. I mean, for me, the real value in a digital twin is not just being able to simulate what exists currently or even what's happened in the past. It's the ability to predict what will happen in future. And that, for me, is the real definitive value of a digital twin, or should be.
Fantastic. And it sort of brings us back to, you know, the whole concept of BIM execution planning, and, you know, the EIR that needs to be, you know, written up correctly, so the correct information is included from the start of the project, whether it's a brownfields or a greenfields project. Richard, any feelings around that?
So this is the BIM Community Africa, and I think it's a nice, well done for bringing it back. The whole promise of digital twins relies on a strong start, and a strong start relies on interaction with the end. So it all has to tie up nicely. So, I mean, Andrew, the world that you work in, we've had this conversation before in this group, that we've got to figure out how to bridge that communication gap between the operation and maintenance teams, or the facilities management teams, and the investment teams who are responsible for delivering a CapEx project, and then involve the planners of the actual project execution, whether that's at a, you know, an employer's requirements level, which requires quite a high level of organizational maturity, or whether that is delegated to the appointed person who's going to be the design lead or the project lead. But that execution plan, I mean, I think we've all seen some case studies where the desire was to take a BIM model and convert it for operations, and it just didn't fit. The type of information was incompatible with the management systems. The level of detail was wrong. It was too much in some instances and too little in other instances. And those kind of things need to be planned for. And then I think there's a greater chance that there can be a conversion from the rich data that we want to gather through the design and construction process into that operational life cycle. And so I think the key question in this conversation is really, what is a really optimal asset life cycle look like when it starts depending on a digital system? How does one think differently about that infrastructure if you had this, you know, unicorn of a thing called a digital twin? If one could create it, how would our operational life cycle look differently? And I'd love to hear Andrew's point of view on that one. You know, to what extent is facilities management world kind of ready for that type of enablement and disruption?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, this is what conversations are all about. I think it's great to talk about digital twins, but I mean, we are not going to get this right until we can actually have physical presence in the design team. And that's, you know, it's all very well us hiding behind computer screens and computer models, but if physically the facilities manager as the eventual owner's representative is not included in the design team, which he isn't, or she isn't, whichever way you like to put it, at the moment, we are not going to bridge that gap. We have, as a discipline, we've grown up in spite of the construction industry and on our own. We've knocked on the door so many times to say, guys, include us, because with 80% of, you know, a building's cost happening in after you've handed across the keys, I think we have a very powerful argument. And that's one of the reasons why I'm sitting in this BIM community, is to keep knocking on the door. And we have a huge capability in front of us, but if we physically are not present or not able to get access to that development phase, then we will forever sit on the outside in the freezing cold. And I know that sounds slightly bitter and twisted, but it comes from many years of experience. And I do think that, and I've said this before to Richard and whoever would like to hear it, that, you know, there is a duty of care, I believe, that the design team, when they walk away from a building, seem to walk away and go on to another project, and the client is left holding the baby, and the facilities manager is there trying to manage that baby, and the basement room full of lever arch files may not be the reality today, but it was certainly the reality not too long ago. I hope it will change, but until we get involved, until we knock down those silos, then I think the reality or the potential of BIM and digital twins is going to remain a bit of a pipe dream.
Janine, you've had some experience now in both the architectural space as well as the mining space. And the mining space is vastly different in terms of the adoption of these digital technologies and digital twins. What is your sort of take about, you know, what the building industry can learn from the mining industry in terms of this?
So Jay, I think the biggest advantage that we have, and I think this kind of goes with what Andrew was saying, is in the mining industry, we have the clients working with us from day one. So we already know what's required, what they need. They're part of the entire process, not just from an owner's point of view, but from a facilities management point of view, and the everyday running of the plant. So they're involved from day one. Whereas on the architectural side of things, every architectural office that I've worked in, they couldn't care less about who's going to see to this building once it's complete. Most of them only care about winning an award for, you know, the building be aesthetically pleasing, but they don't really care how it's going to be operated and what's going to happen afterwards. And, you know, you see all these examples, and we've had it on some of our projects as well, where, you know, these things aren't taken into account. And, you know, you get feedback later that there's issues with the building, you know, whatever it might be. So I do agree that it is extremely important to have facilities management input in the beginning of the design process, but that's also difficult in an architectural sense, just from what I've seen, because your clients, the owner of the building, at that stage of the project, when you get started, they normally don't have a facilities manager that they're going to be using it, that they're going to appoint or that they have on hand. So that only comes later after construction is complete, and by that time it's too late. So, you know, I also think it needs to come down to the client that needs to get all of his stakeholders involved from day one.
And I think also, just to extrapolate on that, is the sort of building asset that gets built in the mining industry is a core component of the client generating income. Rudd, you've been working in the space planning space. Do you feel that sometimes the clients, as they are building buildings, aren't viewing their buildings as such a core component in terms of generating turnover and productivity as they should? And if they had to change that viewpoint that this building is a core contributor towards productivity for their team, that we might have a different approach?
Yeah, I think clients differ, and in reality, we've worked with very different types of clients. We've worked with some clients who, in reality, are everything. They're intensely involved in the project, and they have derived massive benefits from having the building. And one of my clients, we worked with them for nearly 18, 20 years. We managed the building that was built as one of my first projects. And the data we had on that building over the time period was fantastic. We've managed them through all of the use. So it really differs. Other clients, they want to move in. They don't really want to know much about what else is going on, and they want to lay out and thank you very much and goodbye. So it really differs on the clients. We've had some, as I said, tremendous clients, and those have always been involved in why they're building the building. So it has been about the people they're putting into it, how the building is going to impact them, and how they're going to derive benefit from it, and not so much about cost has been always a matter, but the cost has been slightly secondary because it's such a huge amount of money they're spending. They really are very aware of not making mistakes. So it's the good clients are up there with it. And unfortunately, over the period, when we had these good clients, a lot of them we didn't have the software we have nowadays, such as BIM and models and stuff. So it was all 2D, but we made the most use of that information. So it's always usable.
Andrew, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I throw the challenge out there again. I do believe, and Rudd was very lucky that he had a knowledgeable client, probably because Rudd wears the other hat of operations as well. So he can connect the two. And I take Janine's point exactly, is that because you are there and the client is in situ in many ways, that you have connected the two, and you can see that there is a huge benefit to it. I do think that the architectural profession they're the kingmakers in many ways, and perhaps the facilities in the projects that I've done in the PPP space, where facilities management is involved right from day one, there can be a bit of a cantankerous situation between the operations and the development side. But ultimately, that friction, I think, creates the fire that creates a great product. And I don't think that architects should shy away from those difficult conversations that are needed. And we all know that the McLeany curve that talks about understanding that your cost and effect and effort given at the beginning of the design phase is going to make sure that your project runs smoother and that you have better operating costs at the end. I think it's potentially a difficult conversation to have, but it's a necessary conversation to have right at the very beginning. And your client, whether he sells that building on or not at the end of the day, is going to thank you for it.
Thanks, Andrew. Richard, any comment on that?
I think we're reinforcing the fundamental point of involvement. I've recently come to know of a project where the requirements in a tender document for design don't include any acknowledgement of an operator. And it's not the first time I've seen that in a tender document. And so, and this is not an excuse, but it's a picture of what's happening in the market. So when a design house then bids on a project, they certainly won't be prejudicing their bid by including additional cost for that. So it's a very tricky thing, and it's additional coordination, it's additional effort. And so someone's going to have to stick their neck out to overcome that barrier and link the dots. And if it hasn't been priced up front, and if the paying client isn't aware of it, then there's going to be a bit of a challenge.
So what would you say is needed for our industry to really adopt digital twins and take it seriously when the benefits are so clear? Craig?
So I think when you talk about the public sector and the private sector, I think there's many differences at the moment. I think with the private sector, the public sector, there's still an element of actually just doing some fundamental digitization of certain things. We're looking at public sector RFPs at the moment that the only request is hard copy drawings. We need those requests to be a little bit more digital centric, or at least a little bit more data centric at least. I think we're going to see soon a lot of the sort of international framework clients that are coming into South Africa and are bringing with them international trends. I think that's where we're going to see the biggest gains. They're learning and experiencing certain things in other countries, and they're bringing those down to us here, which is great. I definitely think that for me the digital twin concept is definitely the information life cycle and of the project across the different life cycle or different life cycle stages. And I think we need to start more data centric as designers. Contractors need to be more willing to deal with some of the sort of digital outputs that we're providing, and then we can hand over to the facilities manager something that's maybe a little bit more meaningful. But there's still too many chasms between information drops as we move through the different stages for it to be really effective.
Okay, and Richard, you're also doing quite a bit of work in the public sector. Any comments on what Craig was mentioning?
Yeah, it once again, behavior is driven by KPIs and requirements. So we were talking about the benefits, of digital twins. The conversation about digital twins in the market sort of generally runs on two totally separate tracks. On the one hand, there's a high-level conversation that mentions all of the necessary buzzwords in the conversation, and the Gartner hype curve actually showed digital twins at the peak of inflated expectations in 2018. And if you're familiar with the Gartner curve, straight after that is the value, what is it? The valley of missed expectations or something. And they've got a 5 to 10 year horizon worldwide for digital twins to actually reach a plateau of productivity. And part of that process is getting from that high level conceptual conversation where I think most of us are comfortable speaking in, down to the nitty gritty of how these things actually need to be implemented, what the changes are to workflows during design and construction, the ways that design and construction and management services need to be procured in the first place. When those two conversations are merged, then I think we'll reach that point of maturity that I think we've been alluding to in this conversation, where the right questions are asked of the right people early on, where the operators are involved with the inception of the project to make sure that the necessary requirements are stated up front, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really understanding that what are the actual benefits that we really do want to achieve, and then being able to work backwards and say, if we want to achieve benefit A, B, and C, it means we need to take strategic decisions X, Y, Z, and then make tactical moves in the way that we arrive at those changes in strategy. So it's a big concept. You know, conversations like tonight are great because it's starting to bring the dots together or closer together. We're not quite connecting dots yet, but it's creating that awareness of, ooh, there are dots that need to be connected. And then we can start in the industry bringing them closer together and starting to connect them. That's what we need to do.
Great. And as government has said they want to start creating the smart cities, and I think it was the latest State of the Nation address, I believe that digital twins and something like ISO 19650 will start becoming more and more relevant, although we do still have quite a mountain to climb. And you mentioned that, you know, we talk at a level of, you know, of the informed. How do we take our conversation down a notch to speak at the level where our clients are sitting at?
Yeah, it seems very arrogant, but we are all a bunch of experts. Let's be fair. We're all experts in our own right, and we have this tendency to talk with what's called the curse of knowledge. We all understand. We have our own language that we understand, and our clients, even the investor clients, who probably, you know, if we talk at a level 9 or 10. Our investor clients probably talk at a 3 or 4, but our owner-occupier clients probably only talk at a level 1 or 2. And I think we need to really understand where they're at to be able to. And BIM, you know, BIM is a difficult subject to get your head around. It's something I've probably only even just started. I have sort of a beginner's mind, and I'm very curious about it. Does it add anything to their life? No, it doesn't, and therefore they probably turn it off. You know, and I take Richard's point. You know, I think we need to step into the future, and probably not too far into the future, probably a 4 or 5 year window, and go, guys, where do we want to be in 5 years' time? Okay, let's agree on what happens in 5, but let's look back. How do we get? What do we have to do to get to that position? That's often very easy than looking into this crystal ball, which, you know, COVID has thrown us all a curveball that I think our crystal balls, if we had them, that may have been clear, are now very cloudy and dusty. We can't really see into the future. We don't know what's around the corner. Sometimes it's easier to put ourselves 5 years into the future and look backwards. How do we get to where we are? And I think that would be a good place to start.
And I think that leads me sort of to the sort of closing question I want to raise to the team as we start again from left to right. If you could wave a magic wand, you know, what is the one thing that you would change to accelerate the adoption of BIM and digital twins, Richard?
I would really drill into the achievable benefits that by consensus the industry wants to achieve, and identify that pool across the board, across the whole value chain. I believe that's what's going to trigger a change in behavior, is that desire to achieve real benefits, and through that to see behavior and policy align with those benefits.
Thank you, Richard. Janine?
I think for me, it would be, I'd like to pull everyone out of their comfort zones. I think there's still too many people in our industry that are just too afraid to embrace change and to embrace this buzzword BIM. And, you know, we sit here and say we're all a bunch of experts and, you know, we're proud of what our companies have achieved and stuff, but there are still a lot of companies out there that still haven't made that change from 2D to 3D. And until we get everyone on board and we can actually get them to just, you know, bite the bullet and, you know, take the plunge, I think we're going to be sitting where we are for quite a while.
Thanks. To me, there's a couple of issues. The one is really having a common standard so that whatever data is collected can move through the life cycle of the building and still have relevance at the end. And be in such a format that the facilities managers can actually get at that data and update it. And I think one of the things that Janine has spoke about right just now is really this issue of people being very, very proud of what they can do. So they're expert and they're a little bit far out, and they don't really want a lot of other people to know what they're doing because that protects their domain. And I think we'd have to crash that aspect and have somebody who can walk between those domains and make those connections.
Thank you, Rod. Craig.
So I think one of the big things from my side is just having clients requesting more digitization on their projects, and maybe starting to look past just the sort of obvious options of 3D models for coordination and 3D models for producing drawings to more data-centric information. So clients actually starting to ask for certain classification systems and that sort of thing, to me would really go a long way with helping this whole process along the way.
Thank you, Craig. Ruben?
Yeah, I think one of the things we need is a new narrative at the sort of client, operator, investor level, where they understand it in their language and in their thoughts and in their mindset. We've got to move away from we can be the experts, but when we integrate and we interchange with them, we've really got to get down to their level, and we need a new narrative to get them to really appreciate what this is really all about.
Thank you, Herman. And Andrew?
Jay, thanks. I'm last, which is an honour. I hear what Richard is saying, and I really am in service to Richard and all of the work he's done on BIM community and digital twins. But he said what the industry has to achieve. I think we're forgetting something. We're not in service of the asset. We're in service of a customer that uses that asset. And I think what I'm not hearing, except for what Herman just said about investors who are clients but with a lot of money, I think we need to focus on what the client wants. And to hear, well, the client hasn't asked for it. It's not our job to hear what the client wants. It's our job to advise him what he needs. And I think hiding behind, well, the client hasn't asked for a BIM model, therefore we're not going to do it, is a poor excuse, quite frankly. I think we need to step up to the plate as a profession, and I mean everything from architects, engineers, QSs, right through to facilities managers, and say, Mr. Client, this is what you need. And this is in service to what it is you're trying to achieve.
Thank you, and I think that is so right and spot on. Guys, thank you for joining our In Conversation episode 5 tonight. This should be live on the internet in the matter by Monday, I think. But looking forward to continuing this conversation in episode 6. And that's a wrap for tonight. Thank you, guys.